Hello, welcome back to some more of the Heroes of Starcraft reveal. Today, we have a bit more of the Terrans from the Paladins, and we have basically the entirety of the Protoss cards that have been revealed. I'll say Warrior was meant to have been done by now, the other Terran card, but for some reason that's been delayed, so I apologize, the Terran cards are going to be split over like multiple different videos instead. Anyway, just as a reminder, I was a bit harsh on this card. I will admit when I was recording episode 1, I was feeling a bit unwell, I was a bit tired, I was a bit hot and flustered, and I was pretty mean to this card. I do think it's being somewhat overrated on the internet. One thing I will say isn't overrated though, I think the button is extremely strong, but I think Jim Raynor, by the time he comes up, he's not going to give you a big enough board to be really worth, at least for the Spacecraft, Starship, Shaman deck. We haven't seen what Warrior's got to offer yet, and we'll probably see it a day or so later, but now we're going to get to see what Paladin has to offer. And Paladin starts with actually a really good card, I think. 3 mana spell, Salvage the Bunker. Summon 2/2/2 Marines with Taunt. Your next Starship launch costs 2 less. This is really strong. This is, just a reminder, this is a Marine. It's a 2/2 Taunt minion, which is also of the Terran faction. This is basically Tomb Guardians. Tomb Guardians is a 4 mana spell, shadow spell for Death Knight. They gave you 2/2 zombies with Taunt, and if you paid 4 corpses, you'd give them Reborn as well. This card doesn't see too much play, and then part of that is because there isn't really a very strong double or triple Unholy Rune deck right now for Death Knight. But also, Salvage the Bunker is 1 mana cheaper than this, so it has got some stuff going for it, and also, reducing a Starship launch in the future isn't too bad a deal as well. I will say, I don't really value this as, you know, like, you could just take the 2 mana discount off the Starship launch from the card, because I think launching a Starship in general is a bad play, so I don't think they're worth 5 mana to begin with. At 3, you're probably about right. Although, we do seem to see from the Paladin and the Shaman cards, from the Shaman cards and soon to be the Paladin cards, I think you're intended to launch smaller Starships than the other classes have seen so far. But anyway, it's a pretty decent card, to be honest with you. And it also works quite nicely with Jim Raynor, especially after you've used your Jim Raynor. Why? Well, you could play Salvage the Bunker and then just push the Jim Raynor Stim Pack button. And suddenly, rather than having just 2/2 minions with Taunt, you'd have 3 4/2 minions with Taunt. So, because these Marines are Terrans, it's actually quite good to just vomit out a bunch of Terrans, because it works very nicely with the Stim Back button. So I like the synergy between these two cards. Also worth noting, and why I also quite like the Paladin package, a lot of this seems to, at least for Paladin, kind of link up quite nicely with what was Flood Paladin. And about a year ago, maybe like 9 months ago, Flood Paladin was actually quite a strong deck. I think it even pushed it like tier 1 for a deck list for Paladin. And you would vomit out a bunch of minions onto the board, and you would use those bunch of minions to cheat out Sea Giants. You'd play stuff like Crusader's Aura, and you would play your Zilliax, normally in the pylon mode, where you would have its cost reduced by the number of cards on the field, and also would give minions +1/+1. That form of Zilliax has been nerfed since then, so it only affects your field, and you only get +1 attack now, but there is still like the backbone of some sort of Flood Paladin package waiting to be abused. Speaking of Flood Paladin, the Starship piece for Paladin is Ultra Capacitor, a 2 mana 1/1 mech Starship piece. Battlecry, gain +1/+1 for each other friendly minion, also triggers on launch. This card's garbage. really hot trash. However, I'm kind of taking it in a vacuum. When you actually start to like envisage the entire package together, then I can kind of see what you're talking about, Hearthstone team. The most obvious, like, common card to compare this to is Traveling Merchant, and this is a card that did see some play in Zoo decks. It has identical effect on it, it just doesn't have Starship, obviously, as tradable instead. Though what Traveling Merchant did have is its baseline stats are way better than the Ultra Capacitor. Just, if you think about it this way, if you play Traveling Merchant on a bear board, you're playing 3 mana for a 2/3. That is garbage. That's not good enough for standard. If there is 1 minion on the board, you're at the very least getting a 3 mana 3/4. That's not great for standard. At that time, though, it was like, this is kind of acceptable. It's kind of an arena play. What you really wanted was 2 or more minions on the board, which in your Zoo deck you probably could enable. If you compare this to Ultra Capacitor, if there is 1 minion on the board, I mean, obviously paying 2 mana for a 1/1 is bad, but if there's 1 minion on the board, getting a 2 mana 2/2 is also pretty bad. Like, that's below like an arena play even. So I think Ultra Capacitor is actually just really kind of like garbage, to be completely honest with you. But obviously the intention of that is that Traveling Merchant, you only got to play the 2 copies in your deck. With Ultra Capacitor, you're effectively going to get a reapplication of this effect when you start to launch starships. More specifically, you'll get more launches, more value from this if you Jim Raynor the board and fill them with a bunch of minions, a bunch of marines, maybe from the neutral Medivac starship piece, and then perhaps you can sort of, rather than get this like middle ranged quality board, which I think you were like probably gonna get with Jim Raynor, like a bunch of 4/5s, 5/6s, that type of thing. Maybe you could get actually one thing that's quite tall instead, with maybe like a +6/+6 stat line on it. I think that's too slow, to be honest with you, so I'm actually not super sold on this Ultra Capacity. You might have to put it into your deck to run the other starship cards, but I think it's quite weak, to be completely honest with you. It's also worth noting, again, this does work with a lot of the Flood cards, so maybe, again, I'm not seeing the bigger picture here. Paladin has cards like Mining Casualties, Showdown, Muster for Battle, many more that summed out a bunch of tokens. Potentially you could play this and then play the Ultra Capacitor afterwards to give you this big boost to the stat line and Ultra Capacitor that you otherwise would need. It's also worth noting this is a mech, so you can also do stuff like magnetizing cards to this, and you could use Inventor's Aura to get it out a little bit cheaper. Do I think that's actually worthwhile? Not really. Maybe Drone Deconstructor has some sort of merit in it to stick it onto the starships after you form them, but I think other than that, I'm not too sure. Although Drone Deconstructor as well is actually quite versatile if you put it with Ultra Capacitor, as you could either Sparkbot the starship, or you could play the Sparkbot on the board to give it another trigger for the Ultra Capacitor effect. So I kind of like the idea of that in the deck, but I don't think you'll run it in a full mech package. The reward for launching starships for Paladin is Hellion, 4 mana 4/4 mech, Terran faction again. Your other minions have +1 attack. And if you've launched a starship, you get to transform it. We'll just deal with the base form at first. This is Raid Leader. Raid Leader has seen some play in Zoo decks, not particularly recently, but in the not too distant past. It sometimes sneaks into some like super aggressive deck. That is an understated 3-drop. This Hellion is an understated 4-drop, but it's not as understated as Raid Leader is. And actually, Hellion also has a tribe on it, so it's actually probably better than Raid Leader. Funnily enough, I just added this onto the slide. It's also probably better than Felfew's Battery, which is a starship piece for Demon Hunter that is seeing 0 play, but they're very similar effects. But Felfew's Battery requires you to attack with this card to get the +1 buff, whereas Hellion and Raid Leader don't. It's just passive aura effects. The question on everyone's lips right now is, what does this transform into? And I'm telling you, this transforms into a monster. It transforms into Hellbat. 4 mana 4/4 mech. Your other minions have +2 attack and rush. This card is actually bonkers crazy. And in fact, I think this is strong enough that you might even start to build the archetype around Hellbat. Like, it's enough of a draw to do something with Paladin. It's more specifically Flood Paladin type decks. Hellbat is basically Houndmaster Shaw, but on cocaine. Rather than just having your other minions having rush, and Shaw did see some play back in, I think it was Witchwood, right, that Shaw came out. Hellbat has Shaw's effect, but it gives you +2 attack as well on your minions, which is very good. It makes your trades way more favorable on your side. Hellbat is 1 less stats compared to Shaw. It does require some hoops to jump through, but I think the effect is like probably more than worth it. And especially when you consider like it loses 1 stat, but as long as you have another minion on the board, you get that stat back on the other minion instead via the Hellbat +2 attack. So really strong effect. Obviously as well, it has a really nice synergy with Jim Raynor, and more specifically the button. If you push the button while Hellbat is on the field, you get a 4/2 taunt to protect your Hellbat. Actually, it will be a 6/2 taunt now that I think about it, to protect your Hellbat. And you will also at the same time have your Hellbat with 6/4 stat line instead, which means you're going to hit pretty hard anybody, you know, that is coming to dare fight Hellbat or the Marine. So really scary card. It's also really scary for just Jim Raynor's effect full stop. If you can get the Jim Raynor discounted by some degree and you play a Hellbat on the board, or if you've got a Hellbat on the board as you play Raynor, then this big board of minions that kind of sits there doing nothing for the most part, or at least that's kind of how I see it. It's like, haha, I summoned this board of stats, and all your opponent's like, haha, I've got a board clear, and they just, you know, make you cry. Or they use their board just to trade into your board. Good old Hearthstone. If you can have a Hellbat on the field and all of your minions rush, then you can trade favorably into your opponent's minions to get the best result for yourself. So I think there's a really nice synergy between the Starship type mechanics, the Flood Paladin package that currently exists in Hearthstone, and Hellbat. And I think this is going to be a running theme for the mini set. A lot of the cards feel like they're really, really localized just to stuff from the mini set. I don't really synergize with anything that's been printed in Hearthstone. Whereas I think for Paladin, they can actually take some cards from the rest of the set and use them in this deck. So I quite like that idea about the Paladin set in particular, which may be missing in the other classes, and we'll deal with later. Just a reminder again for other Flood Paladin cards, you could throw a muster for battle on the board with your Hellbat, and suddenly your 3/1/1s become 3/3/1s that can rush. That's pretty spooky for your opponent, that's probably going to trade fairly favourably. And if you can get Crusader Aura up in time for this as well, then nightmares start to happen. Like, if you muster for battle and Hellbat and Aura is already on the board, then suddenly these things start attacking for, well, they have 5/2 stat line. That's pretty frightening, no? It's like, it's a horrible thing to happen. I distinctly remember this meta back in old Flood Paladin days, and I say old, like a year ago, where you felt like you couldn't leave Paladin with minions on the board. You always had to trade a minion off because they could always do something with that one guy. And I think this leans back towards that Paladin aspect, that you just have to trade their guys off the board and just don't let them have an inch. If you give them an inch, they'll take a mile, as the saying goes. Also worth noting with Hellbat, this is actually a really good card to use with something like Tear, for example. Maybe Tears as well, but I think especially Tear, as this is a 4-attack minion which you could easily bastardize your deck in such a way that you don't have any other 4-attack minions in your deck. You play your Tear, and then your 2 and 3 costs that get summoned as well with the Hellbat will then get +2 attack and rushing and trade favorably into your opponent. And also so will your Tear, so that's actually a pretty strong play. There are some potential chances that if you're using this very cheap Starship deck as well, you might actually have 2, 3, and 4 attack Starships, which you could resummon with Tear to get more value on the Starships. But I think generally speaking, you would probably want to get the Hellbat over any Starship you could launch. It's just something to think about though. So this is the entire package for Paladin. You have the Hellbat and the, whatever it's called before it turns into a Hellbat, Ultra Capacitor, Salvage the Bunker, Ghost, Starport, Liftoff, and Jim Raynor. I quite like the package for Paladin. I think it's pretty nice. The only thing I'll say about all of this is that I feel like of all of the Terran classes, aka of Paladin, Shaman, and Warrior, I think Paladin is the one that can abuse Ghost the least. And I think Ghost is the most obnoxious part of this Terran package. And I can kind of see that Shaman and Warrior like just toss away half their cards just to use Ghost and like bully your opponent by just making them have the worst time imaginable. But the other cards in the Paladin deck swarm a bunch of cards in the fields, launch a bunch of Starships with Jim Raynor, and then just have a bunch of guys. And actually, again, one of the things I think will mean that this Jim Raynor, or like the Terrans in general, just don't work, is that you need to survive until the point where you can play your Jim Raynor. Salvage the Bunker is a really good card for both swarming the board, which helps with Ultra Capacity, it helps with Hellbat, and the Taunt will help you survive until you can get the Jim Raynor off. So I think altogether the package ties together quite nicely. I like the design of the Paladin package. Just as a reminder as well, these are the other Starship pieces from the neutral cards. Obviously, now that we've seen the Paladin package, Medivac becomes way, way, way more powerful, because you kind of want more and more bodies on the board to abuse their effects. So that's going to be the slight frustration for doing the Starship Paladin deck. You're like at the beck and call of randomness, the gods of randomness. If you don't roll Medivac that often, you're probably going to have a sad time. Now we move over to the Protoss cards. The Protoss cards are for Druid, Mage, Priest, and Rogue. We had seen a neutral, the multi-class card, which is Photon Cannon, which was a 2-mana Protoss card, deals 3 damage if it kills a minion. Your Protoss minions cost 1 less this game. And we've seen the Druid card of Construct Pylons. Your next Protoss card this turn costs 2 less. We also saw some big, massive card for Druid, but we'll deal with that a little bit later on. Either way, Protoss mechanic seems to be to do with discounting cards. Something that Druid and Rogue is pretty good at doing, so let's see what they have to offer. Anyway, we'll deal with the Druid card first, since we saw the previous one already. They also have Immortal, 7-mana Protoss faction card, 5 attack, 8 health mech, Taunt, Divine Shield, Battlecry, spend 4 mana to double this minion's stats. Okay, let's break this card down. There is a card in Standard right now called Shield of Ascara. Don't adjust your sets, this does exist in Standard right now. 6 mana for 8 Draenei with Taunt, Divine Shield, and it also has Lifesteal on it. Basically, for 6 mana, you can get 12 stats with Taunt, Divine Shield on it. Immortal is 7 mana, and you get 13 stats instead. This implies that if you don't get the Battlecry of Immortal, it's garbage, because Shield of Ascaris sees 0 play in Hearthstone right now. There is also a card that is existing in Hearthstone called Moshok Enforcer. This is 16 stats for 8 instead. This card also didn't really see any play. Again, sort of implying that the Immortal, you need to get like the double the stat effect, otherwise the juice ain't going to be worth the squeeze. The final one on my list of, the sliding scale is actually one which doesn't have taunt on it, but it's Colossus of the Moon. Now this card's sort of a little bit of like testing, as this was a 10 mana 10/10 with Divine Shield and had Reborn instead of taunt. And this was, 20 stats. Some people could like treat this because of the Reborn as almost like it has 2011 stats, if you know what I mean. Because you always have to deal with the Reborn minion afterwards. That's not quite the way it worked out, but, it was kind of sticky and annoying for the stats. As I said, this card's sort of a little bit of testing, so I think this is like the stat line you need for a big card to see any play. Bearing in mind, again, the Immortal, to actually see this needs like 11 mana crystals in total, and you need 4 of those mana crystals to be actual real crystals once you've played the Immortal to get the Battlecry effect off. So you have to jump through some hoops to do this. If you do jump through the hoops, though, you're getting 26 stats, which is a bit more than you get on Colossus of the Moon, and you actually get Divine Shield, which makes it quite an awkward card to remove. Probably less awkward than Reborn, but that's a bit of a hand-wavy debatable argument. Either way, that is like the lot in Life for Immortal. Now, we'll start going to the problem of Immortal fairly soon, but the ways to get this discounted, because you obviously have to discount it, otherwise you won't have the mana crystals to play it, unless you ramp to beyond 10 mana crystals, which is something Druid can do. You're going to be using your Photon Cannon and your Constructed Pylons to get this card cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and try and play it as early as possible, because I think playing it around around 10 mana, even if you get 1 mana off it, is probably too slow, right? Here's the big issue. Druid has a lot of big cards on offer. Druid also has a lot of ways to ramp into big cards and just cheat big cards out. The barrier to entry as a big card in Druid is colossally high. Even titanally high, if that's really a word. ENR. Would I want ENR in my deck over Immortal? Probably. There's a little bit more flexibility in what ENR can do. It gives you quite a lot of stats. You get taunt on it as well to protect your face, and it could give you either a hand refill, a face refill, or what's the other thing it gives you? I actually can't remember what the last one is. It gives you some other good gubbins. Would you rather get Stargrazer? And this is kind of the thing that a lot of the Druids are using right now, or at least it's what they were using when Dungar Druid was more of a thing. You would cheat out a Stargrazer, which if you cast a spell on top of it, would give you 8 attack and 8 hammer as well. So rather than getting, this still does have taunt as well, but rather than having this big 16 health taunt stat line, you trade away 8 of that just to give you the armor to your face. Which is quite nice, actually, because it kind of guarantees that nothing can go over your taunt minion. Also, Elusive makes something really hard to remove, because a lot of ways to remove big guys is a targeted spell. You can't do that into Stargrazer, so the question then becomes, is Stargrazer better than Immortal? I think it is, just because you don't have to jump through quite as many hoops to do it. I put Ziliax here, but really, Unkiliax, would you rather an Immortal or an Unkiliax? You would want an Unkiliax, right? There's just a lot more flexibility. The Unkiliax can heal you. You don't need to jump through these hoops of discounting the card with Protoss cards. It's just simple. It's just there and usable. Yogg-Saron, another card that gets cheated out. Sure, this doesn't have any of the taunt stuff on it, but you could steal an Immortal, for example, if your opponent was playing an Immortal. It just has some flexibility in board clears, in stealing their big guys. It's just really, really annoying. Ceaseless Expanse, another big boy. 15/15 in stats. Maybe, not got the taunt on it like the Immortal has, but again, it also has the versatility of board clearing, which is really strong when Druid doesn't have access to a lot of ways to clear the board and control the board in general. And finally, I put on here, even just to compare it to, Arcanite Defense Crystal. This is seen play in a really weird taunt Druid deck, where you copy the Arcanite Defense Crystal, or you put it into a cube or something, and you generate a huge starship with Arcanite Defense Crystals, which is it's going to be a starship with a ton of Death Rattle, gain X armor, X times 6 armor. And then you use stuff like Hydration Station to resurrect it back onto the board. That is really disgusting. You get the armor if this thing gets destroyed, you can like spread it out a bit wider with the Arcanite defense crystals. It's just kind of more of a threat and more of a protection to you than just having a big taunt guy in front of you. Also worth noting, while we're at this Hydration Station, this card really doesn't synergize with Hydration Station, which is like one of the big Druid cards right now for cheating out taunt stuff. And if you're a taunt minion Druid, you really want to work well with Hydration Station. Unfortunately, because this is a battle cry to double the effect of it, you won't get the double stats on it with Hydration Station, which is like a really big loss. Also, worth noting, because this is a battle cry, you can't really do mech shenanigans with it, because I was actually thinking maybe there is some strategy to use a unit, like containment unit, magnetize the containment unit onto the immortal, and then later Hydration Station to resurrect back the magnetized minion. But there are other ways of like Druids getting a taunt mech in standard right now, and they don't go through the hoops to jumping through to get to this. Like they could do it with Unkiliax, for example, and they don't do that, so it implies the juice isn't worth the squeeze there. But if magnetizing could happen before Battlecry, then at least you could double the stat of the magnetized card, but you can't because it's ordered as a Battlecry, so it's really like awkward, this card. I just don't think it's going to go over the bar to be good enough to see play in Druid. Alright, now we get to more of the multi-class neutralish cards. Location, Warp Gate. 4 mana, location with 3 uses for a Protoss card. Your next Protoss minion costs 3 less. The Mad Lads did it. They printed throw 1 mana in the trash. Wow, well done. Well done, Hearthstone team. This card is horrible. Like, truly, truly, truly horrible. Now, I will, like, own up now, having, you know, seen the rest of the set. You might have to run this in some Protoss decks, but it's not a good card by any stretch of the imagination. You pay 4 mana for this card. Bam! Put it onto the board. It does nothing. You push the button, and maybe you play a Protoss card that costs 3 or less. You still paid 4 mana to get a 3 or lower minion out onto the board. You've overspent for a card. Now, I do appreciate you get the value later down the line when you push the location multiple times. The game won't last that long. You'll die before then, so I just think this is a terrible, terrible card. But if the Protoss mechanics are going to work, you might need to use this, as we'll deal with later on. But yeah, this is just a horrible, horrible card. As like a nod to this as well, being not a great card. Sandbox Scoundrel is a card that sees play in Rogue. This card is a 5 mana 4/3 pirate with a mini on it. And Battlecry, this card this turn costs 3 less. So it's not even limited to Protoss, it's just your next card costs 3 less. The disadvantage of all of these decks, and then you normally use this with some sort of Sonya combo. To be fair, Sonya has also been nerfed at this point. You used to use it for both spells and minions. Now you can only use it for minions, but that is what you would do. You would discount something that Sonya could then like copy multiple copies of it with, the mini effect. And the big weakness was playing Sandbox Scoundrel, because it's such a big tempo loss paying 5 mana for a 4/3. Even with the additional 3 cost off the next card as well. It was still such a big tempo loss to do this. Warp Gate is discount your next card by 3. It's only Protoss minions as well. Not even Protoss cards, Protoss minions. It costs 4 and has no body on it. Like, this is just not playable. You can't take a turn off in Hearthstone. You can't do 4 mana, do nothing. You'll die. It's simply that's the case. And before you say, like, maybe it isn't, Starships don't work, and part of the reason they don't work is that playing a Starship is effectively passing your turn, because the cards are so bad, it's such a big tempo loss, that you can't recover from it. You can't, like, pull up from the nosedive in time to not die before you reach the stars. So I just don't see this working. I've also seen some people as well saying, like, you could play Scrapbooking Student after you've played the Warp Gate to copy the Warp Gate so you can discount a Protoss minion by 6. Sure, I did nothing on turn 4. Let's do nothing on turn 5. At least you get a 5/5 body with this, but, like, it's such a slow play. I really don't, like, see it. You need, like, some insane payoff for Warp Gate to actually have any chance of seeing any play. Like, you need to be guaranteed that you're pulling out of this nosedive if you play the Warp Gate card. Going back to Druid, we've seen that 2 big cards. Clearly, Warp Gate is one of the cards intended to give you the big discounts to play these cards. Is the juice worth the squeeze? I don't think so. Like, playing Warp Gate, pushing the button on a later turn, just to get a 3 mana discount on a 12 mana card. Especially when Druid, like, really struggles to fight for board. Like, that's kind of the idea of Druid, that they struggle in the early game. They cheat out some big stuff eventually, but they can't live through the early game to, like, have a board. and they have no really good board clears, you're probably going to play your carrier. If even in like the best case scenario, you play your carrier on like 6, your opponent's going to have 4 minions. So the odds are your 4/4/1s will just trade into their minions, and you've got this 2/14 on the board, which probably isn't going to threaten enough damage going forward at that point to not just get ran over before it can do anything else again. Immortal at least has the taunt on it to like protect the face a little bit, but again, there's surely just more unfair stuff you can do in Druid right now than... even safer stuff you can do in Druid right now than just pay 4 mana, do nothing. So, I don't see it. Also, I guess worth noting for Druid, you also have the opportunity to use Photon Cannon. You can also use Construct Pylons in Druid specifically. And actually, Construct Pylons could also reduce the location cost because it is on card, not on minion or spell. So, there is some potential world where you play Photon Pylon and Warp Gate on 2, which is a bit more amenable. It's easy to take like turn 1 or 2 off than it is to take turn 4 off, for example. And also for the entire Protoss package, maybe you can get away with Druid of just using New Heights instead of going to like Mana Crystals beyond 10, in which case you could just play these cards as natural cards. I don't see it though, I just don't see the entire package. I think it's also a really, really boring package that Druid's got. Anyway, to go back again to some of the multi-class Protoss minions, we have Void Ray. 3 mana 3/1 mech, Rush Divine Shield, Battlecry. If this costs 0, gain +2/+2. Wow, they've printed Darkmoon Dirigible again. A card that saw 0 play. Okay, I'm being a little bit unfair here to Void Ray. It's better than Darkmoon Dirigible. Darkmoon Dirigible was a card that has a 3 mana 3/2 stat line, was also a mech, had Divine Shield, but if you corrupted it, it would also have Rush. To corrupt it, you had to play a card that was more expensive than the card itself, so a 4 or more cost. Void Ray, to play it and get like the super buff on top of it to make it way better than Darkmoon Dirigible, just needs to get it reduced by 3 mana, which we've seen from the location is something that is quite viable to do. However, if you don't get the discount on it, this card is really garbage. Like, it's potentially worse than the Darkmoon Dirigible. The other way to look at this card is, it's effectively 3 mana to deal 3 damage, aka Rush Divine Shield can deal 3 damage and the minion survives. And then you have a 3/1 body at the end of it, which is kind of like Red Gill Razorjaw, but without the Rush. And you merge those cards together. That's not a really good deal for standard. Would you put Holy Smite and Red Gill Razorjaw into most of your decks? Probably not. So, yeah. Without the effect of it, the Battlecry, where it costs 0, this card is not very good. Now, I'm also going to say, when you get the effect of this off, is it still really that good? I play my Warp Gate. Bam! 4 mana, paid. I push my Warp Gate. I turn my Void Ray into a 0-cost minion. And I play my Void Ray, which effectively means it was played as a 4 mana 5/3 Rush Divine Shield. Is that good enough to see play in Standard? To peg this to a card, Evasive Worm has basically that stat line plus Elusive at 6 mana. It sees 0 play. Now, you might have to hand wave this a little bit. Would Evasive Worm see any play at 5? Maybe, but it has Elusive on it as well. Like, it's a pretty big keyword to have on it. It makes the card way hard to remove, especially combined with Divine Shield as well. You basically have to trade it with damage at some point, and more specifically minion damage. For 1 mana less, you lose Elusive. It also is a 2-card combo. Also, Illidari Fellblade. This is a card that's not in Standard anymore, but was accessible to Demon Hunter. This is a 4 mana 5/3. That's the same stat line, by the way, if you include the Warp Gate mana cost. Rush, same as Void Ray. And if you could outcast it, you would get Immune, which is actually like basically the same as Divine Shield. Now, obviously, it was awkward to outcast this card, which is part of the reason why I didn't really see any play. It's easier to get the Void Ray discounted to 0. However, it's going to take multiple cards to get this discount, so you're not guaranteed to get your Warp Gate in the same hand as a Void Ray, for example, and still you have to wait for 4 to set it all off. I don't think this is particularly good. I think it's okay, but it's like, unless you do it specifically on 4, I think it's actually quite a weak play, so I really don't see the dream of this. One other thing worth mentioning on this card, though, is it's a mech. So you can actually do some mech shenanigans with it, and Rogue still has a mech package. For example, you could discover this with Pit Stop and give it +2/+1. Which means that if you could get the discount on top of this as well, you're getting +4/+3 stats on it, which turns this into a 7/4. That is very threatening for a mech package, which was normally quite aggressive. Similarly, you could put a Lab Constructor onto this as well, because it's fairly likely the Void Ray would live on the field around, turn 4 if you can get it to a 0 cost. as it would be hard to get through the Divine Shield. If you can put a lab constructor onto it as well to start copying it, that is really, really, like, frightening. I think it's actually too many hoops to realistically jump through, since you would have to forge the constructor as well, but just be aware of, like, this type of thing. It's pretty spooky. And then similarly, Drone Deconstructor, you might be able to get a Spark Bot with a random bonus effect, and maybe you get, like, Wind Fury or something onto the Void Ray, and that makes it even scarier. And then finally, Voltron Prime, the Titan for Rogue, has some pretty nice synergies with a Void Ray, especially if you can get a Void Ray in your hand that costs 0. You play Voltron Prime on 6, you play your Void Ray for 0, and then you get the Prime effect way easier on an additional minion without requiring another minion to be on the board at that time. It's fairly minor, but it's still quite a nice value add to some sort of mech deck. Do I think you're going to see a Protoss Rogue mech deck? Probably not, but there is some threads you could claw at the very least, unlike some of the other cards. They also have access to Chrono Boost even. 4-mana Protoss spell. Draw 2 Protoss cards. Summon a 3/4 Zealot with charge. I'm really happy that my Hearthstone team is still printing charge cards in the year of 2025. Okay, well, let's do the usual. This card is basically the Protoss equivalent of the Terran card Liftoff, which was draw 2 Terran cards, you get a 2/1 Starship piece summoned. Chrono Boost is draw 2 cards. Draw 2 cards is Arcane Intellect. Arcane Intellect sees 0 play. However, would 2-mana draw 2 cards see some play? Possibly. Chrono Boost is draw 2 cards and choose it specifically for Protoss cards, which is normally better than just drawing cards in general. Now, what would you value a 3/4 Zealot with charge at? Well, a 4/3 charger was caught Chrono Elite, and this card did see some play. Actually, saw quite a lot of play when it was released in some aggressive warrior decks. More specifically, like weapon warrior decks. Charge is always a scary card to have, like, in Hearthstone, especially when it's charge that can go into your hand, where you could hand buff it. On Chrono Boost, it's actually just a board version of charge, which means you have to board buff it to really do any scary things, or board copy it to do some really scary things. So it's probably about a 3-mana-ish card, and indeed, the Hearthstone team agrees with me. They value it as a 3-mana Protoss card, which all in all, when you bundle this together, it means it's actually quite a good deal. You're sort of getting like 2 mana on the 2-cost draw, which means that the 3/4 Zealot with charge is kind of like a 2-mana minion. So all in all, I think this is a pretty good card for 4. Now, here comes the game of which of these 4 classes can use a charging minion the best, that is on the board and not in your hand. Oddly, Priest is one of the better options. Priest has a few board buffing cards. They have Orbital Halo, for example, especially if you can play your Chrono Boost adjacent to your Orbital Halo. Play your 3/4 Zealot, you draw 2 cards. Play Halo on top of the Zealot, turns into a 5/5 with Divine Shield, and you charge in 5 damage to the face. And it's going to be pretty hard to remove after that, so not completely crazy, pretty reasonable. They also have stuff like Power Chord Synchronize. If you're really desperate to get one of these things back into your hand again, you could copy it, especially with the Finale, to give it a 4/6 stat line, and the one in your hand to be a 4/6 stat line. I think it's a lot of hoops to jump through. Like, it'll end up working out as about 5 mana to deal 4 damage, but Priest could do that, I suppose. The other really kind of like spooky thing, and I don't quite know how you'd abuse this so far, they have Chilling Vol'jin. So if you could get your 3/4 Zealot with charge onto the board, and there is some other ginormous minion on the board, for example, like a Starship, for example, and you Chilling Vol'jin their Starship and put their stats onto your charger, you could potentially do some disgusting things there. Also worth noting, since you can use the Hunter Tourist, Chilling Vol'jin, you can use some Hunter cards with Chrono Boost in your Priest deck. For example, Sasquatch. You could just use Sasquatch to recast a Chrono Boost to give you another 3/4 charge just to keep the damage going. And how about this for a million IQ play? If you can like keep copying, especially if you keep drawing cards in your Protoss Priest deck, what if you put Monkey Business in your deck? You get your charge onto the board, you draw a bunch of cards via the Chrono Boost, you play Monkey Business, it fills your hand with bananas, but oh no, my hand is full. So you start feeding your Zealots, eat this fucking banana, Zealot! Gah, gah, gah! And you smash 7 bananas down the Zealot's throat. That turns into a 10-11 charger. That's really frightening, so I think it's too much of a pipe dream to, like, you know, give Zealots bananas. But it's a funny pipe dream, so maybe it's something I'll like look into for deck creation. I just like the idea of the combo wombo. Anyway, to get to some other characters, as soon as this was shown for Rogue, a class that does disgusting, weird things, Immediately people were like, holy shit, there's a 3-mana minion. People are going to Shadow Step this into Sonya. And probably people will try to do this, because if you Shadow Step the Zealot back after its charge, it turns into a 1-cost minion, and Sonya can now copy 1-cost minions only, and give you a 0-cost copy, which means that combined with Sonya, it's effectively a 5-mana, 2-card combo, 3 if you include the Chrono Boost. And actually, if you include the Chrono mana as well, you need 4 mana on top of this, so I guess all in total, we'll say 9 mana, 3-card combo, and it does 9 damage. That's not really the dream for me, so I think people are like overestimating the likelihood that Rogue are going to Shadow Step Chrono Boosted 3-4 Zealots with charge back into the hand just to Sonya them. And actually, just to get more to the point of that, the Crystal Cove exists in Rogue right now, and they have access to South Sea Deckhand. I do see these cards occasionally paired together in some decks, but they're not really performing particularly well. Sort of implies that there is not really a good board-based charging deck, or even actually hand buff-based charge deck in Rogue right now. So I don't think Rogue can really abuse the charge aspect too much. Not to say the card's not good, but specifically abusing the charge. Druid also can't really do it. They've actually got very few ways to board buff, and most of them are board buffing in wide ways, like Drum Circle, for example. So, and I couldn't think of anything for Mage, so I actually think there's not a lot of ways to abuse charge with these 4 classes in particular, and really this is just going to be a value-added chip damage to the board. What could be a bit more abusable, though, is the hero for the Protoss. Artemis, 7-mana hero card. Battle Cry, summon 2 3-4 Zealots with charge. Your Protoss minions cost 2 less this game. And your button is Twin Blades, 2 mana. Give a friendly minion and your hero +1 attack this turn, and Divine Shield. And you can put this into your Druid, into your Mage, into your Priest, and into your Rogue deck. And people started shitting and peeing all over the internet when they saw this could go into Rogue, because again, this is like 6 more guaranteed damage at the very least in Rogue. You can actually give your +1 attack to the charge minion as well, and you get it on your face. So actually, you could actually potentially pump out 8 damage with your hero, and give your guy Divine Shield to make it harder to remove, and give your face Divine Shield as well to make it harder to remove from the game as well. The card this reminds me of the most, to be honest with you, is Kurtrus. Kurtrus used to get bigger and bigger demons depending on how many attacks you had during the course of the game. And your button was Ashfallen's Fury, which was give your hero +2 attack, and your button would refresh after a friendly minion attacked. Now, you had to jump through a few hoops other than the +2 demons, so generally speaking, you were getting like +6 attack on your Kurtrus, the demon render, and then your minions couldn't go face, obviously, because they only have rush, not charge. Artanis can do a little bit more than that, because you guarantee get the 3-4 Zealots with charge. So you're getting the 6 on that, and if you can use the button as well, you're getting +2 on top of that as well. Kurtrus could go deeper than that if you could have minions on the board before them, but the principle is kind of the same. You're going to get some sort of minion on the board, you got some sort of presence. In the case of Kurtrus, they were bigger, more like imposing minions that you had to deal with. In the case of Artemis, they are smaller minions, but the Twin Blades are probably a little bit easier to just put into play, I guess. It's kind of hard to explain. Like Ashfallen's Fury, like you need to like combo the cards to really get like huge value off it. Twin Blades, you can just push the button and feel quite happy with it that way. Also, things with Artemis that I don't know if this will work. Hero Power Druid is still a package right now. I'm going to assume that if you Artemis and you've Groovy Cat, it's going to work. Like your hero will get +2 attack, I think. I don't think you'll give it to the minion though. I think it's just specifically your hero get +2 attack. Don't quote me on this one, we'll have to see what happens, but if Groovy Cat does work with the minion plus damage as well, then things could get a little bit spicy, because there are other hero power, like, improving cards around Druid. I mean, Sing-Along Buddy is a neutral card, which potentially could use on your Twin Blades to gives you +4 attack, since you get it 2 on the minion and 2 on your face instead. There's Spread the Word as well for Draw Engine in Druid, and Popular Pixie just to turn your button into a 0-cost button, or just refresh the button so you could use it multiple times in a turn. So we'll see how Hero Power Druid works with this. Also worth mentioning for this, that you could potentially use Construct Pylons to get the hero card out cheaper. I think this is like the one card we've seen so far from the Protoss cards that is not minion or spell, it's literally just any card. So you could use your Druid preparation on Artemis to get it up a bit earlier. I don't think it's a huge deal to be made about that, but it's a potential offering. Now, the other card that is kind of spicy What if you use this with Raza, for example? Raza, for the rest of your game, your hero power refreshes whenever you play a card. This is a priest card. This card sees like no play and has never seen any play, because really priest can't do anything about it, because priest is just an afterthought of hodgepodge cards that the developers, I think, wanted to put in other classes, but couldn't fit them in there, so they put them in priest instead. But what if you could use Raza with Artenis? So you play your Raza at some point during the course of the game, you play your Artenis, and then you have a bunch of cheap cards, and you just use your Twin Blades to continuously buff and buff and buff the 3/4 Zealots and your face, and you use that for some sort of OTK. That's pretty spicy. That sounds pretty interesting, no? So maybe that is something that they do. Also, we've mentioned that Priest can Taurus into Hunter, and you could get a Sasquatch out of this, which means you could actually use your Sasquatch to recast the hero Artenis to give you another 2/3/4 Zealots with charge, refresh the button as well, and then push a lot more damage on a subsequent turn. So it's actually quite a lot of pressure, and this got me quite excited to play Priest, right? This sounds like a fun package. Surely, like, they've thought about Artenis with Priest, right? And Priest is going to be some sort of aggressive class, right? With Raza and cheap cards, right? They thought about Priest. Anyway, we'll deal with Priest later. To continue with the 4 classes I'm dealing with right now, Mage. One of the things I can think about for Mage, and again, it's a bit of a spoiler for the future of the Mage class, Mage has got a lot of protoss cards, as we'll see, that are a bunch of cheap spells. Potentially you could use this with Rayla, for example, to cast a bunch of cheap spells, and give you access to Paladin cards, Divine Brew, because Divine Brew works really well with the Twin Blades, as you can give your minion Divine Shield, which means that every single Divine Brew you play on that card gives you the +1 attack instead of the Divine Shield instead. So there's quite a nice little harmony between those two cards, along with the Rayla then cheap spells in their Protoss build, as we'll see later, plus the Divine Brew being a cheap spell to give you a board full of minions. So I can see some sort of weird Protoss Rayla package, like the Protoss going to the beach. Okay, sure, I can believe that. One final thing I'll mention, because I can't think of too many like disgusting, abusive things to do with Rogue other than just existing in Rogue. Henchclan Thug's actually quite a good card to combine with this. Again, I don't think this will necessarily see any play, but if you can Artenis and Henchclan Thug and play the button, which you could potentially do with a discount on Artenis at some point during the course of the game, you could use your Twin Blades to hit the Henchclan Thug, which would then give that Divine Shield, so it makes it more likely to live. You would also be giving your hero attack. You could attack with your hero and then get the +1/+1 buff on a Divine Shielded minion, and sort of just protect it with the button whilst also scaling it. It's probably not good enough for standard anymore, but it's quite obnoxious if you can set up that board state. Alright, now we'll go to Rogueland for their Protoss cards. Dark Templar, 6 mana, 5/3 Protoss card, Stealth, Battlecry, destroy an enemy minion. Play another Templar to merge into an Archon. Okay, we're going to go through this quite quickly because you really need to see the merging effect to like actually be able to evaluate the package. Dark Templar, though, is effectively Assassinate on a 5/3. I'd probably say a 5/3 stat line, if it was going to see some play in Hearthstone nowadays, would have to be like a 3 mana card for 8 stats. Assassinate sees 0 play at 4 mana. It probably would see a bit of play at 3, so it's kind of like Assassinate combined with a 3 mana 5/3. It's okay, is what I'll say about it. It's probably something that like is on the edge of seeing play, especially with the stealth added on it. And the stat line is more aggressive, so that you can use the stealth to pump out a lot of damage going forwards. And as we'll see, Rogue is all about smacking your opponent with damage in the face, so it's actually quite a nice stat line. The other card is High Templar. This is the other Templar you can merge together. 6 mana 3/5 instead. Battlecry, deal 2 damage to all enemies. This is Consecration. Consecration doesn't see that much play right now, but has seen play when it got buffed to 3 mana. And again, you're on a 3/5 card, which is probably a 3 mana stat line. So all in all, packaged together, it's actually quite a decent card. Where things get really interesting, though, is when you combine a High Templar and you polarize it with your Dark Templar. And by the way, I think you can actually put High Templar with High Templar and Dark Templar with Dark Templar. It's 2025, you're allowed to do that. And this gives you Archon, 8 mana, 8/8 Protoss unit. At the end of your turn, deal 8 damage to the enemy hero, and 2 damage to their minions as well. This is bonkers. Like, this is seriously bonkers. It's a lot of damage. A lot of hoops to jump through to get to this stage, but it's a big hit of damage when you do get there. It's just a little bit less than a Pyroblast, that's 10 damage. I mean, it could go to a minion, but realistically it's 10 damage to the face, right? Take 2 damage off your Pyroblast, and you add on to it like a small Holy Nova where you don't get the restoration, but you do get the damage to minions. And you tie that together into, I guess, playing 2 6-cost cards. It's there or thereabouts on the value scale. It's probably a little bit too fair, actually, but obviously the plan with the protoss cards is to discount your card, so you're not going to play it as 12 mana stats over multiple turns. You're going to play it on the same turn. The obvious thing that people will be thinking, and it's certainly the thing I started thinking as soon as I saw this, is how do you copy this card? Because you could legitimately get to a situation where if you can put 4 of these on the board, you're going to kill most opponents, unless they're doing some shenanigans with armor on their face. Cover Artist is a really good way to copy this. If you can get all the pieces reduced in cost and you have an Archon on the board, you could Cover Artist it into a 3/3, and you don't actually care about the stat line, you only care about the effect. And actually, it's even more obnoxious than that, because it's more likely to kill a board on your opponent's side, because the 4 damage to opposing minions is way more likely to kill the board than just 2 is. So not only are you doing 16 damage to the face, you're probably denying them a board that would be used to clear your board afterwards. Another way of doing this is just Zolaring the Archon, and then playing it later as another 8-drop. Definitely viable, maybe a bit slow, but remember this is a Protoss card as well, so any of the Protoss discounts will apply on the Archon as well. So if you can get this back into your hand as a copy, you're probably going to be playing it as less than an 8-drop. The other way of doing stuff with this is the Replicator Inator. Again, it's a lot of hoops to jump through, but if you can get the gigantified form of the Replicator Inator onto the board, you could potentially do stuff with the Archon. Now, it's actually more hoops to jump through than even just that, as I'll explain now. Because the Replicator Inator only works on playing a minion, so for example, if you use Dark Templar on the base form, it won't work. It will work. When you play the Dark Templar, let me try and explain this properly, it will copy with the Replicator Inator, but it won't merge the two together because the Dark Templar only works on merged cards played together, not summoned. Similarly, if you do the Archon after it gets merged together, the card won't be played, it'll be summoned, so you won't get the copy. So for the Replicator Inator to work with the Gigantify form, you'd have to bounce the Archon back to your hand at some point, which Rogue can do with bouncing stuff, but I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze at that point to get the Replicator Inator to get it to the Gigantify form, to bounce an Archon back after playing the Archon as well by playing 2 6-cost cards. It's just too much, right? So I think more likely it's Cover Artist, Zola the Gorgon, and some of the cards we'll see in a moment. One strategy that people, again, will be pooping and peeing all over is being able to copy this with Sonya. And more specifically, shadow stepping this card back and then copying it with Sonya. Now, bear in mind, this isn't a battle cry, so you're actually, if you bounce this card back, you're basically going -8 damage to start with, as you would have just got the 8 damage anyway. So you really need to copy this with Sonya to be actually worthwhile. The real good breakpoint with Shadow Step, obviously, is a 5 mana discount, and you can do this via Artemis plus a Warp Gate Press. That will then turn your Archon into a 1-cost as you play it, which means that Sonya will give you a copy that costs 0, and you could play those 2 cards together to give you 16 damage to your opponent's face, and 4 damage across their minions. When you work all this out together, though, it's quite a lot of mana and a lot of faff, like 5 or 6 cards together, and I just don't see the pipe dream of that working. Also, you have to be really, really careful with your mathematics, because you need it to get it to be a 1 mana card. And that's actually going to be quite hard if you're trying to use Photon Cannon and Artemis and Warp Gate all together. It can lead to some really awkward maths. So I don't see it. The most simple strategy would just be use Bounce Around featuring Garona to get you this back as a 1 mana card. But again, it's so heavy on the mana cost. Since Sonya's going to cost 4, Bounce is going to cost 3. So you have to be playing the Archon type cards for 2 or less, which is really late game thing for it to happen. So I actually don't see this package as much as people do maths about it. I don't think it'll work. And in fact, we have some history on this. People were really scared with Astalor the Flamebringer, the final form of Astalor, that people would just Shadow Step Astalor back and keep playing it over and over again. And this never really came to fruition. Sure, some people would do it, but it was just generally too many steps to play the 3 forms of Astalor, to then bounce back an 8 mana 8/8, to then get the 14 damage on the board. I think it was actually 16 at the time. It was just too many hoops to jump through, and it just simply wasn't worth it. You only died in the process of doing it, in fact. So yeah, I don't see it. I will say that Astalor, it got spread over minions, so there was some counterplay to it where its Archon is to the face, but it's not a battle cry this time, so it's actually kind of awkward to bounce and play around with anyway. Also, finally, Astalor took multiple forms to, get to that point. This requires you to polymerize 2 Templars together, which is also a pretty big hurdle to jump over. So I don't see the dream of all of these, bouncing Archons back and copying them type of thing. I can just about see Cover Artists being used with an Archon just to give you another 8 damage. And I think that's what you're going to do. You're going to generally run this as a more aggressive-minded deck if you're going to try and do anything. In fact, you get some extra damage from High Templar as well, because of his Consecration-like effect. And you're just going to try and, like, chip and then, like, chunk with the Archons your opponent down instead. One final intrusive thought I was having as well when I was making this video is it just says play another Templar to merge into an Archon. If you played something like Zandalari Templar, which is like an impossible thing to really happen in a rogue, would that work? Would they polymerize together and give you an Archon? I assume not, because the Zandalari doesn't have the text on it, but I was kind of imagining that meme template of, you know, hello Dark Templar from Starcraft, hello Zandalari Templar from Hearthstone, and like the next panel down is just Archon on the field and there's, you know, just question marking because there's no one else around him. Anyway, I just put that on because of the intrusive thoughts. More rogue cards. Blink, 2 mana Protoss spell. Draw a Protoss minion, combo, it costs 2 less. Normally tutoring cards are actually pretty strong, and this has been true for basically the entire history of Hearthstone, and indeed some see play nowadays, some see plays in older days. Peaceful Piper doesn't seem too much play nowadays, but has seen play in the past. This was 1 mana 1/1 draw a beast specifically. So 1 mana cheaper, but was also a tutor. Dig for Treasure sees play in Rogue now, which again was 1 mana draw a minion, but if you hit the pirate, you would get a coin with it, which kind of turns this into a 0 mana card. So you might be expecting me to say, like, you know, I think 2 mana draw a card is not good enough. Actually, I think it might be okay. Harbor Scamp saw some play back in old Pirate Warrior decks as just draw a pirate. This was a 2 mana 2/2. You did get a body on top of it. With Blink though, you're drawing the minion and you're taking the 2 mana discount off the minion, which is quite nice. As the minions, actually for the Rogue Protoss minions, are actually pretty good, so I can actually see this being viable as both a tutoring card, especially since you want to get 2 merged together and there's only 4 Templars in your deck since it's going to be 2 copies of 2. You're going to need stuff like Blink to actually tutor for them to begin with. So yeah, I think you'll run this in your Dark Templar, High Templar type deck. The only question is, and by the way, these are the only Protoss minions Rogue can run, is do you put Void Ray in that deck? And I actually think you won't put Void Ray in that deck because you're really going to want the tutor to give you a Templar to try and give you an Archon later on. So yeah, I think you'll just run this with Dark Templar, High Templar, get the cards, and the 2 cost reduction on these cards is actually fairly nice. Paying these as 4 instead of 6 is obviously a way better deal. I think at 6 they weren't too bad, but at 4 they're really, really good. So I can see Blink seeing some play in this deck. The other reason why I can see this seeing some play is it tutors for a card and draws a card. Who likes tutoring draw cards? Dorian does. And as I said, you can only put 4 Templars in your deck, which actually makes it hard to get 2 polymerizations off during the course of the game. How about instead that you play Dorian on the board, you play a Blink, you draw one of your Templar cards, you get the 2 mana reduction on it, and also you get a 1/1 copy of it that costs 1. Because again, you don't care about the stat line on these cards. Then on a future turn, you can play the 4-drop with the 1-drop. They will polymerize together, you'll get the double effect of the Battle Cry off of it, which might be just destroy 2 guys, which is actually pretty spooky in its own right, and you get an Archon on top of that. I really can see this package working together. It's just, the issue is, and it's kind of the issue with this expansion, it's so insular that you can't really put other cards in it together to make it work, and you sort of just have to put all the Protoss cards together and pray that it works. And this will never get any more support in the future, so it's like, make it work now or it's never going to work at all. So I kind of on the fence of, I think this won't work, but there's some fun mechanics within it, and I think people will try it out. One final thought as well. Imagine if Quasar wasn't nerfed in this deck, considering all the Protoss cards want mana discounts. You could definitely have seen a world where you got the deck reduced to effectively 0 via Quasars and Protoss reductions are just drawn through your entire deck and done absolute disgusting things, I imagine. Now, this would only have happened 30% of the time, probably, and caused people to go onto Reddit and have a meltdown, but it would have happened. It would have happened to you and you've been sad, which I actually think is part of the reason why Quasar was nerfed, is they could foresee what was coming in the future and they're like, we can't do this, so just a food for thought. Anyway, we now move on to Mage. Resonance Coil, 3 mana Protoss spell. Deal 5 damage to a minion, get a random Protoss spell. Interesting card. We have seen deal 5 damage to a minion before in Hearthstone. It is Starfall, one of the choose 1 options in Starfall. This wasn't good enough to see play in Druid in general, unless you could get the choose 1 effects combined, in which case Starfall did see some play in the combined choose 1 decks. In more modern Hearthstone, Workshop Mishap is a card that exists in Demon Hunter. Again, just trust me, this exists in standard. That is deal 5 damage to a minion, excess damages both neighbours, and if you can outcast it, you get lifesteal on top of it. Neither of these cards see any play. Now, I will say, they were 4 and 5 mana. Resonance Coil is only 3, so I think this is actually quite a good point to play the Resonance Coil at. 3 mana to deal 5 damage to a minion is not a terrible deal, and actually you get a card on top of it, which is quite nice. The only issue is the quality of the protoss spell good enough? These are almost all the protoss spells. I mean, these are the 4 we've seen that Mage will have access to. In fact, I think it just has access to via random spells. It's Construct Pylons from Druid, Photon Cannon, Chrono Boost, Blink. I'm going to spoil it as well. I'm going to reveal the Priest one, which is called Hallucination now, just because it's kind of awkward. I couldn't decide whether or not to end with Mage, as we'll see in a moment, or Priest, but I decided to end with Priest instead, and we'll just show off the Hallucination card in advance. So Hallucination summons a copy of a friendly Protoss minion, and it takes double damage on the copy. All in all, I think these are okay, but you really need to see the full Protoss package to really be like, you know, aware of what's going on. Generally speaking, again, before you fully realize the package, which is going to be, and as I alluded to before, casting a bunch of spells, Construct Pylons is probably going to be really good. It's basically preparation in a deck that is kind of Miracle-esque. Not truly Miracle, but it wants to cast a bunch of spells, as we'll say. Blink is going to probably be quite good, even though it's probably going to run too many minions. It's still a cheap card that's effectively a cheap card. And then Photon Cannon will be very nice to get more discounts going forward. So I think, generally speaking, you've got 5 cards to go for, and I think 3 or 4 of them are okay. I think Hallucination would be a pretty low roll for just this deck. The other spell that we have for Protoss cards, as you'll be able to generate from that as well, is Shield Battery. 2 mana, gain 5 armor, your next Protoss spell costs 2 less. This is basically Safety Goggles, but instead of having no armor, you get the discount in the future when you cast another Protoss spell. Safety Goggles does see a bit of play in Warriors, but to be fair, most of the time it sees play in Warriors that want to go extremely late into the game and sometimes can use their armor as attack, so it's a bit of an unfair comparison, but I do think Shield Battery is a pretty solid card. Again, the only Protoss spells you can normally put into your deck for a Mage is Photon Cannon, Chrono Boost, and Resonance Coil. I think all of them will go into the deck together. You could generate some random cards from Resonance Coil as well to get the discounts on. Just be careful if you do that though, because one of them is a 0 cost and one's a 1 cost, in which case you won't get the full discount on those cards. Especially dumb if you play the 0 cost one, because then you've effectively prepped a prep. And that always makes you feel stupid. Also worth noting, if you'll be casting all these bunch of like spells all on top of one another, you probably want spell-loving cards like Arcane Artificer, for example, to give you some armor to live late into the game, or Cosmic Keyboard to summon a bunch of minions. Now, you might be at this point saying, why are we doing this? What is the payoff? The payoff is Colossus. 12 mana, 9/4 mech from Protoss. Deal 1 damage to all enemies twice, improved by Protoss spells you cast this game. If you want to know my reaction when I read this card, this was my reaction. By the way, can someone call Scar the Catastrophe? He's reigning somewhere. What is this card? It's so insane. Deal 1 damage to all enemies is the effect of Scar the Catastrophe. Scar can also be improved. Your improvement is by playing elementals on consecutive turns, which is somewhat of a disadvantage because it means you have to fill your deck with elementals. Now, I do appreciate it's not a huge disadvantage because elementals want to be played in subsequent turns anyway, so it wasn't a huge downside to doing this. And people didn't like this card. Fortunately, the Shaman Elemental package never really got to tier 1. It probably capped out like low tier 2 at the very best. And actually, in the current meta right now, isn't doing particularly well, full stop. Colossus, you don't have to worry about playing your card in subsequent turns. You just play them over the course of the game anyway. And don't worry about just scaling 1 at a time. No, that's not good enough. You double scale, effectively. In fact, it's more than double scaling, as you're not getting +2 damage at a time, you're literally doubling the damage. Which means if you can play 15 spells over the course of the game, Colossus will kill you. You'll just get one-shot by Colossus. And then it's going to be a really fun gimmick. By the way, just again, to note to this and, the Hearthstone dev team, very recently Lamplighter got nerfed. And Lamplighter was basically Scar, but as a neutral, and it's caused some issues in the past, and was seen as a playstyle that was unfun to play against. What the fuck are you thinking of releasing Colossus for? You just said, like, we've listened to the community, people don't like Lamplighter, it's not very fun to get burnt down by 20 damage in the hand with a neutral card. We've learned a lesson, we're going to cap it at 4 damage. And then the next set, release Colossus. What the fuck are you thinking? Kindly, but what the fuck are you thinking? I just don't get it. This is going to be really toxic. By the way, I don't think it's going to be good, but it's just going to be a really toxic playstyle to play against again. Okay, the obvious first issue we have with the Colossus strategy, and why I don't think it's actually going to see any play, is that you have to discount the minion. And unfortunately for Mage, they don't have great ways to discount minions. They really only have Photon Cannon and Warp Gate. Warp Gate is kind of already said he's not good because it's 4 mana do nothing, kind of. And Photon Cannon is probably just going to be too slow to get the Colossus down. You really would like the Colossus to be played around 7. And I just don't think you're going to get a 5 mana discount by that point. So you're probably playing Colossus around 10 at best. And I don't think that's actually scary enough for it to be a tier 1 deck ever. The other thing just to remind you of is the discounting card in Mages only works on spells. It doesn't work on just Protoss in general, so you can't use Shield Battery to discount the Colossus. It's literally just Photon Cannon and Warp Gate. Now, what is annoying is obviously people are not going to play 15 spells. That is unhinged. What people are going to do instead is play 7 spells, and you'll just Zola it back. Again, it's kind of requires you to get the discounts, which again is why I don't think this is going to work. If you could get this to 7 cost, and you're doing this around 10, you could play Colossus after playing 7 spells. That's going to deal 16 damage. You Zola it back, and you can do 16 damage on the subsequent turn to get lethal. It's probably going to be too slow to realistically work, but it's just so... It's just going to be horrible to play against. People are going to do it, like, 1 in 30 games, and you're just going to have a super, super sad time when it happens. It's also worth noting, it's not just to the face, it's all enemies, so if you had a board, goodbye, your board is gone. And this is a 9-4, it's actually quite a big threat, and you have to answer the threat as well, so... This isn't going to be fun to play against. If people didn't like Lamplighter, they won't like this. Anyway, there's also some other stuff you probably want to do in this deck. Since you want to cast a ton of spells and just vomit them out, you probably want to put Railer in your deck. And there's actually another added advantage to putting Railer in your deck. And that is it gives you access to Grillmaster. Because one of the things I've not actually said yet is Colossus is a neutral. You can put 2 of these in your deck. Sky, you could only put 1 in the deck. Lamplighter, you could also put 2, to be fair. But Colossus, you can put 2 into your deck. And you can tutor it for it with Grillmaster. Because drawing your highest cost card is almost always going to be Colossus. Other things you could do with the Protoss card, since it's actually quite hard to cast a bunch of spells and get the discounts on the minion, you could put the Galactic Projection Orb in your deck and a bunch of spells around the cost of the what's the name cards, the Protoss cards, and just hope the Galactic Projection Orb recast them again. I think that will work, but I'm actually not 100% certain, so watch this space. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. But either way, I think it's all going to be a bit too slow. Again, coming back to the Mage package, these are the 4 Protoss spells you can actually put into Mage. It's Chrono Boost, Photon Cannon, Shield Battery, and Resonance Call. This isn't enough spells, it's only 8 Protoss spells in the deck. You're not going to get your OTK via that, so you're going to have to use cards that generate more copies of Protoss spells. You're probably going to have to put like Audio Splitter in your deck to copy some of these cheap cards, just get another version of it. You might need to rewind. I think it's a more realistic outcome where you can duplicate an arcane spell, for example, duplicate rewind, get 2 copies of these Protoss cards back, and maybe you hit the ones that reduce the cost of a minion multiple times, and eventually get Colossus down to a playable point. Similarly, Volume Up can give you another copy, and you can also play Infinitize the Maxitudes and just pray that you look into Protoss cards. Similarly as well, you can also play Exarch Hatteru and just hope that you go into like Shield Battery, because then you could play a Shield Battery for 1 that discounts a Protoss spell by 2, you draw a Protoss spell, and assuming it's one of the Protoss spells that is 3 or less, and that's most of them, you could then play that for 0 as well, and you get another spell, but I think this is such a low roll pipe dream that I don't think it will happen. So all in all, I think Mage package is super toxic if it works, but I don't think it'll work, so you're fine. And then finally we get to Priest. I've got to be honest with you, with my Priest slides, I was kind of like flagging at this point, so I've not put as much effort into it. But don't worry, the Hearthstone team also didn't put as much effort into the Priest package either, so we're peas in a pod. They have Sentry, 2 mana 2/2 mech, Protoss, Lifesteal Death Rattle. Your Protoss minions cost 1 less this game. Have you ever seen a more, like, vanilla-y, boring card than this? Like, I just can't be excited about it. Even just to compare to Photon Cannon, which you could actually put in your deck. That's a fast card. It does 3 damage. You get the 1 cost discount on your minions immediately as soon as you kill it. And you kill something in the process. The game changes. With Sentry, you're going to put it on the board, and your opponent is going to be like, do I kill this? It's like, oh, I guess I'll kill it with something. They'll probably deny you the lifesteal as well as killing it with a spell, and you get the 1 mana discount. Cool. Would it be nice if Priest had access to some sort of Death Rattle synergy? But of course, Priest is the class that hasn't got Death Rattles right now, weirdly. Also can't Taurus into classes with Death Rattles either, so it's really weird that they gave us a Death Rattle card, so I just can't see any way to really, like, abuse this in any meaningful way. It just seems like a really slow card. The only other ways I can think of, like, abusing this to some degree is bouncing them back or copying them in some way, with Power Chord Synchronize or Creation Protocol. But this is such, like, a minor thing to do with Creation Protocol. It's just simply not worth it. And same with Power Chord Synchronize. I just don't think it's worth playing multiple copies of this. I kind of see the idea of it, though. The idea of these Protoss cards is that you need some time to set up the discounts, so you need some way to survive versus the swarm decks out there. And Sentry at least gives you some lifesteal, but it's only 2 lifesteal. It's so minor. It's like, it's almost no roadblock. You might even just ignore this as a lot of aggro decks. Anyway, we now get to the big payoff card for Priest. Mothership. 12 mana 10/10 mech. Taunt. Battlecry and Death Rattle. Get 2 random Protoss minions. This was my face again. Not necessarily this time because, you know, I think this card is good. I don't. I think this card's kind of garbage, but it's mainly because it could get Colossus in Priest as well. I don't want to see Colossus anymore because I think it's going to be really unfun to play against. Either way, Protoss minions. Assuming it can't find itself, which actually I'm not entirely certain it can do it. Normally when it's on a discovery, you can't find your own minion, but I don't know about just generating a random card of itself. I assume that doesn't work, but maybe it does. Either way, if it doesn't work that way, these are the only Protoss minions in the game. It's Immortal, Carrier, Void Ray, Colossus, Dark Templar, High Templar, and Sentry. You get 2 random cards from this package. Is that a good deal? No, not very good. 10/10 stat line is actually not that, like, imposing in Hearthstone, unless you can get it for, like, quite cheap. Again, I always mention this, I don't really know where the discourse is right now on mana cost to stat line. Like, what is the mana cost and stat line for a minion to see play that is just completely neutral? This isn't, by the way, but it effectively is. It doesn't really have any impact on the board state. It just is a value generator beyond its taunt stat line. I feel like, a 10 mana 10/10 taunt that generates 4 cards, would that see play in standard? Probably not. It's just too slow and a bit, like, too fair even. It's also, like, so weird on, like, the randomness of it. Sure, the pool is very small. It's potentially only 7 cards. But if you hit, like, a Dark Templar and you don't hit the other Templar, that's going to feel really stinky. Also, if you get Colossus and you're not playing many Protoss spells in your Priest deck, which is a pretty good chance you're not going to be doing it, you aren't really going to have to get a big Colossus off, and you're probably going to play Colossus as a big guy, as a board clear more than anything, which is okay, but it's not great. Then Immortal is a bit boring, and Carrier is a little bit boring, but maybe you can put out some damage, but you're a Priest, so you're going to be playing from behind, so it's more likely going to trade into your opponent's minions, and then you might hit a Sentry. If you hit double Sentry, you're just going to cry because you've played a 10 mana 10/10 taunt in standard and got a Sentry out of it. I just don't see it. I just don't see it. I think it's just too fair. Just simply too fair. Also worth noting, the only thing I can think of doing, because again, Priest has no Death Rattle package, they have no Battlecry package. The only thing I can think of with all of this is if you keep generating random Protoss minions, Raden could bring them back. But then when you look at the 7 cards, 4 of them are really bad to bring back with Raden because they're Battle Cries. One of them's a 2/2, which is bad because it's a 2/2. And then really all that's left at that point is that you're hitting... Oh, and I've done it a disservice again. Sorry, I've done it a service, in fact. I forgot one of the Templars in here. So it's basically 6 of the 7 cards are worthless. The only good one is the Carrier. So I don't think you would use this with Raden. It won't work. It's like, it's just too normal. This is too arena-ish. So yeah, as I show on here, Carrier is like the only good result from this. And even then, you're probably going to have like board issues instead, because if you get Raden and a bunch of Protoss cards back from your Raden, Carrier will not be able to summon the 4/4 to the board to attack random enemies. So I think even that is like a complete garbage pipe dream. So you're really playing Mothership just to get 4 cards. And when I really think about it, I think this card reminds me the most of Bot Face, which is a card that sees 0 play. This was a card that could generate a ton of minis in your hand as long as the Bot Face took damage. And this random smorgasbord of value just never was worth it. Even in Warrior, a class that can do a lot of It has a lot of easy ways to ping its own minion for a small amount of damage to give you the minis. It just was never worth it. Same with Mothership. Why are you going through all these hoops to play low tempo cards to get discounts on a big guy when all your big guy is a 10 mana 10/10 taunt effectively? Get 4 cards eventually that are probably not that good. I don't see it. I think it's going to be complete garbage. Finally, we have Hallucination. You can tell I pieced out at this point, I forgot to put the animations on it. Summon a copy of a friendly Protoss minion, it takes double damage. We've seen it before on the Mage slide. This card is actually quite good. When you really compare this to like Reverberations, which is a card that has seen play in both Warlock and Mage, since it's a dual class card. Reverberations copies a minion, and both the copy and the original die if they take 1 damage. Hallucination, I believe it's just the copy that will take double damage. So it's got way more staying power than the Reverberations copy. And it's 2 mana cheaper. The big downside of Hallucination versus Reverberations is Reverberations could hit opposing minions, whereas Hallucination has to be a friendly minion, and it also has to be a Protoss minion. So it's a very finite pool, as we've said already, because there's not a lot of Protoss cards in Priests. In fact, just in general, but specifically in like Priests as well. And obviously the two you would probably be looking at is you copy the Mothership to get even more value. Yay, more value. Or if you can get a carrier on the board from the Mothership, you could potentially Hallucination the carrier to fill your board with interceptors. Bearing in mind, though, again, you're going to have board space issues. You could only get 5 of them, but it's 20 damage rather than 16. Yay. That's good, right? Okay. Let me tell you why I think Hallucination is going to be broken. It all comes back to Artemis, and it's a card I've not really mentioned because I don't think it's going to do a lot of great work in Mage. It is another way of discounting the minion, to be fair, in Mage as well, and I probably will see play in that deck. In fact, any of the Protoss decks will run Artemis in it. It's just a good card to play for the tempo, if anything. But remember back when I was talking about Artemis, I mentioned about Raz the Resealed, that it'd be really nice to have cheap cards to reset your hero power button, and use Raza to reset the Twin Blades. There is one Protoss card I've not really mentioned yet on all of those pools, because it's the Zealot. The Zealot is a Protoss minion, so I believe you could hallucinate the Zealot. Why is this important? Well, I'll answer the question. You play your 3/4s with charge from your Artemis. You Twin Blades one of them. You play a random cheap card, your button resets, you hit the same guy with the +1 attack, and you also get +1 attack on your hero. You do this until you get to whatever, it's 1 mana or something. You play Hallucination. You copy the buffed Zealot, which has charge. You get a reset on your Twin Blade as well. Now, this will require you to probably have Papercraft Angel or something like that on the field so your button costs 0 so you can actually do all of this, but if you can set this up, Papercraft Angel, Artemis, Hallucination, I forgot to put Papercraft Angel on the slide, sorry. Maybe you could do a situation where you vomit out a lot of charge damage suddenly in OTK someone. I've not really thought of the full mass together, but it's the only thing I can think of Priest doing which is actually remotely fun, so there you have it. This is why I think Hallucination is going to be good in Priest. By the way, I don't think it'll be good. I think it's a pipe dream. I think it's like a 5-card combo and requires huge amounts of tempo loss on the way to doing it, so maybe you can do it in Wild, who knows. Anyway, that is it for this episode. Tomorrow, we'll see. I'm actually not sure if I'll do a video tomorrow or the day afterwards. Zerg is going to be announced, or all the Zerg cards over the next 2 days, and at some point I assume we're going to get the final Terran class, aka Warrior. So if Warrior's announced tomorrow, I'll do a short video on Warrior, I think. Otherwise, I'll wait till Friday to do the Zerg cards together. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, why not leave a like and subscribe? Everything helps me out. Let's see you again next time. Bye!